Okay, can we call for the swearing and intimate apologies, please, Stuart?
Yep, thank you, Chair, and morning, everyone. So for the swearing, Councillor Lillian Jones.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Watts.
Here.
Yep, thank you. Councillor David Richardson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Canning.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Mabin.
Yeah, present.
Thank you. Councillor Beverly Clark.
Here.
Thank you. And an apology from Councillor Sally Cogley. Councillor William Lennox.
Good morning. Here.
Yep, thank you. Councillor June Kyle.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jennifer Hogg.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. And Councillor Elaine Stewart. Councillor Stewart. Okay. Councillor Stewart's showing in the list, but I'll keep an eye on that, Chair.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Stuart. Okay, thanks, Councillor Stewart, and welcome to Councillor Stewart for our first Governance and Scrutiny meeting today. Okay, is there any declarations of interest?
From the items on the agenda, Chair, I wouldn't necessarily expect any unless members have any connections in relation to any of the contracts in 6 or 7, but I doubt it. So probably not the answer.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, and with that, we'll move to the previous minutes. Can we agree approval of the as a correct minute?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So, is there any matters arising from the minutes? Anybody?
Just one point, Chair.
Yes.
Page 8, paragraph item 10, sorry, Roman numeral 4. On reflection, what I've agreed with colleagues is that we will build the financial information into the future reports on dangerous derelict buildings. We'll add that to the template and then regularly provide the information in the context of the report. I didn't just want to put a wad of information because it is all quite detailed and complex when you start to break it down, just as a snapshot in time. So we will build it into the report and report it on a regular basis going forward. So that will be actioned when you next see that report.
Okay, David, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. Okay. So we'll move to our next item, which is the Planning Performance Framework for 2020-21. And we have David Wilson, who will present the paper to us this morning. Are you there, David? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, members. The purpose of this report is to present for your information the findings of the Scottish Government review of the annual Planning Performance Framework, the PPF review prepared and submitted by the Council. This report covers the period April 2020 to March 2021. The Council as planning authority is subject to scrutiny across a range of performance markers by the Scottish Government. The PPF is an annual submission made by each Scottish planning authority using common performance measures and criteria. It includes service delivery proposals as well as an overview of progress with previous service delivery proposals, and includes a range of case studies to highlight particular examples of good practice or notable achievements attained in the reporting year. The PPF is audited by the Scottish Government and an annual report from the Minister returned to each planning authority. The 2020-21 report is attached as Appendix 1, which is page 17 of your papers. There are currently 15 markers across development planning and development management functions, scored on a red, amber, green basis. In this period, the authority scored 10 green, 4 amber and 1 red marker. This represents an improvement on the previous year's performance with 1 fewer red and 1 fewer amber marker. The report itself in front of you today focuses on those areas scored as amber or red as areas where performance has been below the expected level or where room for improvement has been identified. In this respect, the decision-making timescale marker remains red, reflecting a slower application handling time than previous year and overall slower than the national average. As set out at paragraph 10, the key reason for this slowing of performance overall reflects the impact of COVID restrictions, where home working and restricted ability to travel to visit application sites played a substantial part in reducing performance. Additionally, challenges in recruitment and a substantial volume of work that is undertaken by this authority on open cash restoration and large-scale wind farms, which is not a feature of every planning authority's work, is not accounted for in these statistics. And this is added to a slowing in the decision-making timescales from the previous year. Paragraph 11 notes improvements in relation to legal agreement processing has resulted in an improvement from red to amber, with the government noting in particular the introduction of quarterly reporting to Planning Committee to ensure that such cases are project managed. Paragraphs 12 and 13 relate to conclusion of legacy cases. Legacy cases are applications that have been with the authority for more than 1 year since validation. The Scottish Government note further improvement by the authority in this area, yet the marker remained as amber. The Council has made very significant efforts to clear legacy cases over the previous years, such that, as confirmed by the quarterly report to Planning Committee, very few legacy cases occur at any time, and such cases remain a very small part of the overall workload. It's highly unlikely that all legacy cases can be cleared due to the nature of certain complex developments and the need for legal agreements, for example, which just by their nature will extend some of the time of some applications. The continuous improvement marker was scored amber, as noted at paragraph 14, largely due to the red decision-making timescale marker, which partly offset the green markers referenced by the Scottish Government within this score. The Scottish Government did, however, recognise that there is clear evidence of a considered approach to continuous improvement in this authority. Finally, the Development Plan Scheme marker was also scored as amber, as explained at paragraph 15, this being that Local Development Plan 2 will not be adopted within 5 years of LDP 1. The LDP 2 process has been affected by national planning changes, but has progressed significantly nonetheless, and this marker remains the same as the previous year for the same reasons. Finally, an action plan of what we seek to achieve in the 2022-23 period is set out paragraph 16. This is focused on building a stable, well-resourced service to allow performance improvement to be delivered, including maintaining good performance where evidenced and striving to improve performance in those areas identified as requiring focus, including in particular decision-making timescales. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
David, thanks very much for your report. Just before I ask members if they've got any comments or questions, there's just some comments I'd like to make myself. So, just regarding the continuous improvement, the amber score, it just seems a bit unfair given that the government had recognised that there was a huge effort made in that respect and the continuous improvement. To get red, I think, well, to get the amber due to the red decision was maybe a bit unfair. Can you maybe just elaborate a wee bit on that for me?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it is a bit unfortunate. It's almost as if we've been double counted on that one. We can go back to government and kind of make a case on things, but they explained their position that they were taking that into account. So that plus the green markers that they took into account obviously resulted in an amber. So whilst it's amber, I don't feel as if it's indicating any significant dip or issue with performance, and they actually recognise that we do have that kind of careful focus on improvement. We do set that out in our planning performance framework, and the government did recognise that we met all or most of those previous commitments. So overall, I think it's a reasonable picture, and it's probably that double counting that kind of drops us down to an amber there, if I'm being quite honest about it.
Yeah, but hopefully for next year's report there'll be a better marker, hopefully. Okay, members, does anybody have any comments or questions for David? Councillor Mabin.
Yeah, page 12, item 10, top of page 12, this is the part explained by vacancies and staffing resource. And then I was wanting to ask David as well if that comes into part 18, well, there's no impact in HR. If we've got vacancies and we're struggling to get the correct staffing resource, should that not come under HR? And is there any progress? Are we filling the vacancies that we need filled?
That's probably why it's not under HR, because it's just operational. It'd be an HR issue if we didn't have the post and the structure. It's just unfortunate that what we're finding in a number of professions, but particularly within the services that form governance, planning, environmental health, and to an extent lawyers are in shorter and shorter supply. So it's more an operational issue because it's not about the structure. It's not about the recruitment process. It's simply about the fact that every time you put the net out there, you don't know what you're getting. David can give all sorts of examples. I might get the detail wrong, but we were just talking there, you know, you go out for a senior planner and you maybe get 1-2 applications. So you may get good applications with those numbers, but generally you need a bigger body to make sure you're getting the best candidates. So the real problem we're having is simply the churn. We've also got 5% turnover built into the budget, but it's more about trying to actually attract people, and we look at that all the time. We look at the offer, we look at the job role, we look at the money compared to other comparable authorities. You try and be competitive, but unfortunately in a number of professions there just aren't enough coming out, and particularly in planning, the private sector is far more attractive to a lot of planners, even new planners. So you're almost always in that position on the public sector side, the local authority side, of robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of trying to attract this one from there and this one from there. And it's all in the margins. People are making decisions, as you would expect, based on personal circumstance. So they're not maybe moving for promotion or this or that because the offer's the same. Folk are down to moving because they maybe need a family or home. So you're managing that all the time. And it's one of the things we pick up every week in terms of reviewing the vacancies. But what we are doing is putting them out with clear on which vacancies are absolutely essential and need to be filled. And the majority are in that position. It's just that the larger the body of staff, the greater the movement. And when you have vacancies, sometimes you can go out and you can cast the net and you can get a good candidate, even 1 or 2, and you can get somebody that's eminently appointable. Sometimes you can go out and in almost exactly the same circumstances. If you were taking the fishing analogy, same spot in the river, same time of day, same weather, same shadow, same temperature, same sunshine, and you get nothing. Because the market just does fluctuate, but it's not. It's there by way of explanation, and we don't make excuses. It's an explanation because it is relevant to the subject matter. But to be honest, I wouldn't want to give the impression that we're making this out to be, you know, a major impediment or we're limping along. It's something all services have to manage, and we do manage, and we're used to managing. And it is about juggling things and juggling priorities. I'm sitting at the moment with 2 vacancies and a team of 5 in the litigation team in legal, because one went, and you find sometimes it's like buses in reverse. Used to say 3 buses, you know, come along together. Sometimes people depart in 1s and 2s. Somebody makes a life choice and it's prompts somebody else to think. So there's absolutely no rhyme or reason to the vacancies, how they arise, when they arise. And if they arise 1 every quarter, that would be absolutely fantastic. But they tend to come randomly, and it's quite arbitrary what return you get. So the assurance I would offer the committee is we have enough in the structure. The problem is actually getting bodies into seats, and we do absolutely everything we can. In the legal example there, you have to up the ante. So of course, if you're putting the net in and you're getting nothing, you change your position or you change some of those features. So we went back out. We went out for 1 and we get very low applications, and we went back out because by then a second one left. So we actually doubled it up, prolonged the advert, made it clear it was 2, made sure we were selling the job, and then we also added in, there's a daily email communication to lawyers through the Scottish Legal Network, Legal News, and they carry adverts. So for about £500, don't like doing that, but to get a better return, for instance, we took that measure. So you're always looking at what else we can do to try and augment the chances of getting good applicants to allow us to make a good appointment. And we do wherever we can. And it's not that we're overly fussy, but obviously there are minimum standards as well. You don't just take anybody just to fill a seat. You need people that are competent, knowledgeable and experienced. So that's the position. It's not a problem, it's an issue. It's not particularly a significant issue when you look at everything else we're all having to deal with. Kellett comes to mind, but it's something that's there. It's legitimate by way of explanation to raise it, and it's just one of the aspects of management that makes every day a challenge, because it is a challenge, but it's one we continue to manage.
Yeah, thank you. I'm fine with that.
Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a quick question about the red performance marker on the decision-making table, page 19. I mean, I noticed the householder applications, 9.1 weeks compared to the Scottish average 8.1. It's not too far out. Same with the local applications, 12.4 Scottish average. We're at 14.1. It's not too far out. But the difference where major applications are concerned, Scottish average 41.3 weeks, but East Ayrshire 73.2. That just seemed to be, way out. What's the reason behind that?
Maybe just before David comes in, I think the main reason is we get more wind farm applications than the rest of the country put together, and they come under major development. So we're compared with a Scottish average where nobody else is putting through double figures of wind farm applications a year. It's the geography of the area, unfortunately, makes us more attractive.
And the definition of a major application is quite wide then. So there can be easier major applications than wind farm applications then.
Yeah, that's just one category. The major ones, don't get me wrong, the major ones are actually section 36. So that means they're considered and assessed and determined by the reporter appointed by Scottish ministers, and we're a consultee. So the biggest wind farms, the biggest applications are actually national and determined there. But a lot of the wind farms we get that are a bit smaller than the national ones fall within major. So yeah, other authorities will have other types of major application, but they won't have as many of the wind farms as we do, and they just take a bit of management in terms of through the process. So yeah, it's great having averages, but you've got 32 planning authorities in Scotland, and the range and nature of business that each one processes won't actually be identical or anything like similar, depending on size, scale and position. And that's not to say the big cities don't have other types of made, the size of developments they've got, Glasgow, got Dundee, etc. But obviously the bigger the authority, the bigger the resource. So in the main, and unless David's got anything to add, I think that's the main one. It's great having averages, but is that you being compared? Is that you and me running 100 metres against each other, or have one of us got a bag of bricks in our back? It's that kind of a thing. So I think
we're not comparing like for like, basically.
Well, we are in a way. It's just that the nature of where we are in terms of performance, they are major applications, so they're light to that extent, but we have more at the higher end that are complex, because the wind farms we have to get right in terms of that 25-year potential liability at the other end when they're due to come down, preferably not falling down. I don't know if David's got anything to add.
Yeah, I can maybe just add a wee bit. In terms of the majors, just in terms of its definition, it's different development types. This is set out in legislation about what a major development is, and it depends on the type of the development. So for housing sites, it's more than 50 houses is a major development. For wind farms, it's more than 20 megawatts, but up to 50 megawatts, and then it changes over to section 36, as David mentioned. We don't have huge numbers of major developments, so if one or two run on longer, it significantly skews that figure. And there's good reasons why they can run on longer. Quite often we will work with applicants to get developments to the right position to be able to allow an approval. We've got to be mindful of the economic development aspects of this. We can turn things about quite quickly if we wanted by refusing things that weren't quite right. But ultimately, it's not necessarily the right decision to just jump straight to that, just so that I can get a great result in terms of the number of weeks that we've handled something. So some of the bigger complex sites, as major would indicate, do take a bit of time to go through the system, just because they've got more to them and there tends to be more information required. There's more public involvement and so on. So when we then do get to determination, some of them will have taken longer. And hence why we have this marker or this number that looks as if we're significantly beyond. And yeah, we are, but it's on the basis of a small number of applications and they're all project managed. We don't just sit on them and think, right, we'll determine that next week. It's just got to be ready for determination. So that's what builds into that figure. So for us, it's not always about speed. We're trying to make that right balance for this authority. If we were in the city centre, you could, if you weren't happy with something, you could refuse it because the developer will be back in 5 minutes because they're desperate to develop there because they'll get a huge return. We're not in such a luxurious position here. We've got to be working with people that are looking to invest in the area. So that's a bit of the background to it. But ultimately, it comes down to it's a handful of applications. So the average, for any that we deal with really quickly, we tend to have maybe one or two that are that bit longer, and that skews that average. When I'm back here next year, you'll see the figures. I've got the figures for the following year, and that increases again. But there's a very good explanation for it in terms of there's two that have met their targets, but two were legacy cases. For good reason, we worked with the developers, but that ultimately results in a poor figure when the Scottish Government take their basic marker on me. So That's the background to it. So there's a wee bit more background, there's a bit of subtlety to it, but that's the reason why it looks a lot worse than the Scottish average. It is, but there's good reasons for it, and
No,
hopefully you understand that.
That's fair enough. Thanks for that explanation. Cheers.
I think it'd be fair to say as well, David, that despite everything that you've explained yourself and the staff and that David's touched on, well, that was at the time of the pandemic and maybe just be emerging from that. So would that have had an impact? I would imagine it did have. Applications would still be coming in, and yet we were having to find different ways, new ways of working, which would have added to the delay, etc.
I thought so. Yeah, it certainly did. It's strange at this time because we're looking back. We tend not to use COVID as any kind of excuse. It's not an excuse. We kept our business running, and there was good business continuity during that time. We were able to continue to take applications and we were able to continue to deal with them. But there were impacts in terms of some things made it go slower. We couldn't get out in site to visit sites, so we couldn't make determinations because we have to actually see what's happening on the ground. So that had an impact. But also on the developer side, large parts of it shut down. So they had live applications with us, but their agents and their architects and so on were quite often furloughed and literally just asked us to hold applications. So that kind of element did impact on us. So COVID, for COVID's sake, didn't completely shut our business down. We were quite mobile and capable. We had remote working already in place in planning, so we were able to keep the business running. But elements of it did have an impact, and quite often you see that in terms of the timescales that we then had to perform to. So it just dragged a few things out. And all Scottish authorities, I've looked at various PPS for different authorities to benchmark, and they were pretty much all the same. Some very significantly poorer than us, massive drop off because of the way that they had worked. It was such a culture change to them. We didn't quite have that. So we kept the business running, but clearly there was some impacts from COVID during that time, and we're not using that as an excuse. But again, that was just a fact of it did have some impacts on us.
That's fair enough, David, thanks. Councillor Watts online?
Yeah, on the major applications, obviously, I mean, thinking about it, would the Hillock development, the incinerator development, have had a drag on that? Because obviously that hasn't been determined and that's been going on for quite a long time. So my assumption would be that that would be included within a major application as well.
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, that is a major development. It's been with us for just slightly more than a year now. It's just went legacy, but an incredibly complex application with an awful lot of public interest in it. We will bring it to determination in due course, but again, we have to make sure that we've got things right from the planning perspective before we bring that in front of members. So yes, that is major. I believe it does have an agreement with the applicant in terms of a revised timescale, which kind of takes it out of the Scottish Government figures. But on the straight facts, yes, it will be legacy as well. By the time that comes up, it will be well more than a year before members make a decision on that one.
Just to clarify on that, but for avoidance of any doubt, it is a major development, but as we've advised in previous papers and David touched on there is the option to reach processing agreements with applicants, and we believe, as he said, we can check, but I think Killock is subject to an agreement, so the agreement stops the clock. So not every major application, if it's subject to an agreement, is actually informing the average, because the clock stops by agreement with the applicant. He's not in a position to progress with this, so the clock stops. It's not fair that it's against the authorities performing if the developer's wishing to put a hold on it. So Killock is subject to an agreement, so it's actually not going to be, the meter's not running at the moment, but it will still have been with us over a year. Obviously, the tax case had an impact on the developer's appetite to proceed with that, and they had to work their way through that. And then, as a consequence of the tax case, there's more issues to be addressed between the applicant, the Waste Authority, which is us, and the Scottish Government Waste Management Division around about assessment of waste capacity, because in essence, the tax case and the new rules that followed in terms of the amendment to the regs throws up that while the outcome of the review that was carried out on Killock was to basically put a moratorium on any future heat from waste incinerators, the actual detail of the review, when you look at the report, does carve out a potential exception. I'm not saying it'll apply in Killock because I'm conscious we're in public session, but there is another stage that needs to be worked through, which is to look at whether or not, given it's a current application, whether or not there is a demonstrable need for this capacity before a final assessment and determination can be made, and that will involve engagement with Scottish Government as well, which is the stage we're at. So it is complex for more than one reason. It's new ground because we're lucky that way. We get to plough the furrows with these things because, as I said earlier, we have more of these than anyone else, so we tend to get to the trickier ones first as well. But we're working our way through Killock. We're engaging with BAR, we're engaging with Scottish Government, and it will come forward for determination. And as per the previous arrangements, when we thought we might get to it a bit sooner, just to clarify the proposal, the standing position in the proposal is it will come to Council for determination when it's ready. It'll be a special council to determine Killock, not the Planning Committee. That was the position previously reached with the chair under the last regime, and that's the standing arrangement, and that would allow all councillors to be involved in the determination of what is obviously a significant application when it comes.
Thanks for that clarification, David. Councillor Cannon?
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of quick questions. One was obviously reports up to March 2021, we're 18 months on. A couple of things. We touched on resources. Maybe you could give us an update on where we are today. And also one of the amber was legacy. Again, we're 18 months on. Could you give us a bit of an update on where we are with legacy? Thanks.
Thanks,
Touching recruitment first, obviously we're kind of working back a wee bit of time here, and it's continued on. So the vacancies have largely resulted from some retirements and internal promotions. So you're then looking to backfill into different positions. And then we've managed to do that for a number of posts. So some team leaders, seniors and planning officers have all been recruited since this planning performance framework right up to now. But it is that kind of continual change. Some people do move on, and you're always looking to try and recruit into those posts, and we have been successful. But David's analogy was absolutely spot on in terms of you cast your net, but you're not always getting what you want. And we participate in Heads of Planning Scotland, which is all the authorities in terms of the planning authorities kind of work with each other and kind of almost benchmark each other. And this is a continual theme coming out of all Scottish local authorities. There's a general shortage and everyone is finding recruitment difficult in the public sector for various reasons, one of which is certainly there's just not the kind of new blood coming through from the universities that we would like. There is work going on nationally to try and address that, but that's the kind of underlying reason. But it's not for a lack of trying. We certainly have continued to try and recruit. We have got adverts out quite frequently. We have managed to recruit. We have got new people in. It's just that there's always some more that's needed as people move on for various different reasons. So we have been successful, but we're just not there yet. And that's the kind of background to that recruitment and some of the kind of challenges. On the legacy, the amber marker, I'm a bit overly critical of Scottish Government, but I feel as if it is probably a bit unfair. This authority has worked very, very hard over the last 3 or 4 years since it was scored lower for legacy. We used to carry quite a significant number of legacy cases, and we've worked that right down to, at any one time, it's normally in the teens, which is a kind of percentage of our overall applications is not that many. And I know that many other local authorities carry significantly more legacy cases than what we do. So we tackled that. We made conscious effort to try and determine them. You take a hit on some of your statistics when we've done that. So over the last few years, we've managed to work that down. We have brought in the quarterly report to Planning Committee just to keep a public project management type approach to these. So the officers are managing them anyway. We don't want a stalled case. We don't just sit on things for no reason. So it's publicly available. Members can ask questions at planning committee about specific applications, about what the delay is, why is that like that, when are we going to determine it, just so we don't have anything that slows down and is just getting forgotten about. So I think we really are on top of it. And the amber marker was professionally a disappointment. I do feel as if the council have put in really good efforts to try and cut that down over the last few years, and that's recognised in the government's returns, but we obviously still received an amber marker. So I'm watching with interest what the next PPF score for this would be. I'd really hope it will turn green, because we have made further strides to cut it down again, but we'll never remove all legacy for the reasons I've already explained, just in terms of we do have to work with some developers, and some cases are really complex, and although a year seems a long time, it's really not when you're trying to work through some of the complex cases. So there'll always be some. We just do our absolute best to keep that under control and pushed right down.
Yeah, I suppose my point was that we are in a better position then, now 18 months on, and we've made progress on legacy and closing legacy. So that was my main point. We have made progress on those issues from what you're saying, anyway. Is that fair?
Yes, you'll not see the Scottish Government returns yet. We're just about to submit this year's planning performance framework, but I've seen the statistics that build into that, and we have pushed the legacy down again. It's literally only by another 3 or 4 cases, because we were, as I said, we were in the teens anyway, which is a percentage of our work. It's quite small, but it shows that we really are keeping on top of it. It will fluctuate. It may go up by a handful of cases from time to time. It may come down. As I said, we won't eliminate, but we've made further progress again. So that's why I'm confident that we'll change that amber to a green. And if it doesn't change to green, we're having a conversation with the government about what they think we need to be able to achieve, because we're working within those parameters of working with developers, and we won't refuse things just because the time's ticking a wee bit. We'll try and get the right decision. And if that takes a bit longer, that's the approach that we've tended to take here.
You, Councillor Canning?
Yeah, thanks.
Just by way of context, I'm conscious we've got new members as well. In general terms, the management restructure that was implemented last year brought planning, building standards and regulatory in with governance from almost, I think, in fact, 1 year ago today, you get the confetti out. So we've focused, obviously, since then, we've been in and out of COVID at least once, if not twice. We've had the election, we've had everything else. So the focus has been embedding them in and trying to deal with operational matters and look at the performance issues. As you've heard, being absolutely clear, the legacy position is an improving one, and you've seen the way we manage that. We report it here, we deal with the planning committee, etc., and on the stumps, we take the action we need to take and reduce those. The staffing position is a moving feast. It fluctuates from time to time, as I said before, and even when you put vacancies out, you get candidates sometimes and sometimes you don't. So that's just an ongoing feature. In terms of trying to remain competitive, we have, for instance, just done a review in building standards where there was a concern that we were maybe a bit low in the grade, and that's been through re-evaluation, the formal process, and it's led to a revised grade. So it goes back to the point I made about remaining competitive and looking at what our competitors are doing. It's not just about paying people more money for the sake of it, but it is about being competitive and making sure your salaries are comparable for light work in other authorities. So we've done it with building standards, and we continue to keep planning under review. It's not so much about what we're paying, it's about the shortage of people coming out, the universities, etc., who want to go into public planning, as opposed to, if they want to do planning, go into the commercial sector where there is more money to be had, if that's what floats your boat. In terms of the next steps, the final things I need to do to implement the management review is finalise the re-evaluation of the legal manager's post and the creation of what will be called a chief planning officer in terms of the new planning bill, although it will sit within governance, report to myself, but as on planning matters, we'll have one of those broken lines you see in structure charts to the chief exec, and the chief planning officer will be at CMT, EMT, Cabinet, Council, Planning Committee, obviously, and anywhere else where planning matters come up. So they will have that status. They just won't be quite at chief officer level in terms of the structure we have at the moment in terms of the grades, but they will be the chief planning officers. So the next steps are to finalise and appoint to that. David's in an interim position at the moment, and then start with the service review. The service review I was hoping to start about now, but with the impact we have in terms of absences, illnesses and vacancies, and the absence of illnesses are short term, the vacancies have covered. We've just deferred that a couple of months, basically till the legal manager comes back from his current stay in hospital. I'm going to have to just cover more operational matters, but the point is a service review will allow us, and part of the whole purpose of that is to look at where, either in terms of recruitment, in terms of the structure, in terms of practice, in terms of performance, to look where we think we can do better. So we've still got another round of that to go when we get to the service review, in terms of just trying to identify where we can improve our processes, etc., and performance. So it's a perpetual matter. You never give up, you never stop, you never put the pen down one day and say that's us, we're done, just keep doing what we're doing. But the next stage will be the next service review, which I inherited from, it was outstanding at the time, and then it was part because of COVID and everything else. And then we've done the year of implementation, we're bedded in, you can't see the cracks, and the next stage is the service review. So the kind of issues you're hearing here are the kind of issues we'll take the opportunity to see if there's any more we can do in our approach to try and again improve the outcomes. But it is just a fact of life at the moment that unfortunately you don't necessarily get a good appointable candidate every time you advertise a vacancy. I should have just said as well, mate, I was too slow at the start in terms of the context of this paper, just to finish, Chair. As David's kind of given anyway, it is about March, it is about the previous year, and actually we're just submitting this year's return. So it's one of those where there is a gap, understand that, but it's an inevitable gap because we put it into government now. Government does all its analysis, comparison, and produces the report over the next few months, and then sometime around about now next year, we'll be reporting to you on the government's consideration of what we're putting into them this week. That's how it works. So it is always a look over the shoulder, and therefore it reflects that point in time, which is why it was a fair question in terms of where are we at now. And as I said, we're much of a muchness with the vacancies. We go out to recruit and we appoint as best we can, but the other aspects we are continuing to work on.
Thanks for that, David. Anybody else have any questions or comments? No. Okay, then with that, can we agree the recommendations? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. David, thank you very much for presenting your paper today. Thank you. Okay, and it's now paper for complaints annual report 21-22, and that's over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, members. So this another annual report this time. This is one for the previous year, 2021-22, and relates to the Council's complaints framework. So in addition to providing the performance information regarding the complaints work, we also have taken the opportunity just to update members on the new arrangements that were introduced by the SPSO, the Ombudsman, last year. So the report that's presented today is the first year of reporting under those new arrangements. But the Council's complaints handling procedure follows that model that's developed by the SPSO, and that was first introduced back in 2012. Back in 2019-20, the SPSO reviewed that model procedure and have now developed a new one. So the background to the report on paragraphs 3 to 5 sets some of that out. The national complaints handling procedure that was revised that we have now implemented from the 1st of April 2021 did not fundamentally change the complaints arrangements. Fundamentally, we still have a two-stage process where first stage is frontline resolution, and we have 5 days to try and respond to those stage 1 complaints, and then a stage 2, which is an investigation stage, and it's 20 days that we have to complete complaints investigations at that stage. So they are consistent with the previous model complaints handling procedure. The changes that they did introduce, though, were to introduce a new complaint category of resolved. So to encourage councils and other public sector bodies to engage with complainants to try and find a resolution to the complaint without having to rely or to revert to the default position of always just following the stage 1, stage 2 process. So to actually find a resolution to those complaints in agreement with the complainant. So that's been welcomed across the board. It's something that it certainly encourages that engagement with complainants. The other aspects that changed were that they tweaked the stage 1 5-day target processing date, so that if we hadn't concluded a stage 1 complaint within 5 days, it automatically went to a stage 2. So that again was welcomed because it meant the complainant had a bit of clarity around about how it was being dealt with. And the other changes were around about promoting more engagement with the complainant at an early stage, and also around performance reporting. Fundamentally, though, and the performance information that's contained in the appendix to this report does show an increasing position in terms of our performance. So comparing 2021-22 position to the previous year shows an increase of around 50% in terms of our complaints activity. So that's a significant increase. There's a couple of explanations for that, or certainly a couple of potential explanations around that. One is, and we've touched on it already, the significant planning application that we received for the waste incinerator at Killich. That generated 18 complaints. So if we were to factor that into that increase and were to exclude them from the overall complaints, then that would take us down to an increase of 34, nearly 35%. So still a significant increase on the previous year, but a reduction from the 50% that we're seeing and reporting here. The other contributing factor to that increase as well is, and I mentioned, we've had that in-year change to the complaints handling procedure. Part of that brought with it a real surge in the promotional activity around about our complaints handling procedure. So we were out there promoting the complaints handling procedure in our communities, in the council. So we expect that contributed to how we were seeing that increase as well. Paragraph 12, of course, we also reflect on not just the council's performance in managing complaints, but also how many complaints are escalated to the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. So paragraph 12 provides a summary of that. Again, we've seen an increase from the previous year in the number of complaints referred to the Ombudsman. Within that, though, some of those complaints are categorised as premature. So that's ones that a complainant goes to the Ombudsman first before having the council consider their complaint. And, the Ombudsman won't entertain them. They will say that the complainant must exhaust the council's complaints process before the Ombudsman can look at it. So unfortunately, we don't get to see the detail of some of that. All we know is that when we get these stats and they're reported to us, that we get that figure. But really, so it's hard to understand or try to work out if anyone who has went to the Ombudsman first has then came to the council, because they don't tend to disclose that when they make their complaints. Importantly for us, in terms of the Ombudsman complaints, in the last year, in fact, consistent with the previous year as well, the Ombudsman has not upheld any complaints against the council in those 2 years. So that's really encouraging as well. And that's certainly not a position that every council in Scotland can report as well. At paragraphs 13 onwards, we include details around some of the continuous improvement work. So complaints are certainly a way that we and services can look at where improvements are required in terms of service delivery. And we try to capture that through our reporting arrangements and also within the engagement work that we do with services. So we've captured that some of there within those paragraphs. It's the reporting of complaints information is not restricted to this annual report. We also include complaints information in East Ayrshire Performs. So as much as this is for the full previous year, you'll see in the next East Ayrshire Performs report, I think it's period 4 that will come forward to Cabinet and to Governance and Scrutiny Committee, then there will be reference to the current quarter position, and it's reassuring to note that that high level of complaints last year we're starting to see that reduce again back to a more recognisable level that we've seen in previous years as well. So with those introductory comments, Chair, happy to take any questions. The actual annual report is attached as an appendix, and it includes much more of the detail around about some of the issues I've just touched on there, but happy to take any questions, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Just on the complaints that were received by the council, particularly in relation to the planning application, the incinerator planning application. Now, from those numbers of complaints, were some of them actual objections which should have went through the planning department, or were some actual complaints?
So I think David will come in the detail of the planning side, but on the complaint side, then I think it was a reflection on the size of the community objection to the proposal. So they were going through the formal planning process, but as well, I think the complainants were also trying to use any mechanism to try and raise their complaints. So those 18 complaints that I mentioned there, 5 of them actually then escalated to a stage 2 complaint as well. And they were round about the procedural issues that weren't on the merits of the application. That's for the planning committee and planning officers to determine. So the complaints, the formal complaints that we considered, were around procedural issues. And again, to reassure members that those complaints were not upheld either. And I think David's want to come in the back of that too.
Thanks,
Chair.
Ian.
You're getting in front of me, Chair. I would give him the discussion in Killock in the previous item. I was just going to clarify that unfortunately there are a significant number of folk out there who either genuinely believe that the planning authority has an option on which applications it accepts into process, which we don't with the statutory planning authority. If somebody puts in a valid application, and the example I always use without being offensive, but if somebody actually put in an application, well, let's make it a casino. It's not the one I usually use, but if somebody put in an application to put a casino in the car park out there, even though the council owns the land, and it was valid, and it was paid the fee, we'd have to process that. I can tell you what the outcome would be, but we would have to process that. Now, I don't want to set here's course and that, none of that's happening, but people in the likes of Killock, as Ian said, people seem to think that I can get rid of David and all the team and all the staff. And if people just tell us they don't like something, we just shut our door and we say we're not accepting your application. So some of the complaints are actually, why are you accepting this? And then people think that because you've accepted it and you have to assess it and consider it, reach recommendations and a determination and put it in front of the committee or whatever, they assume that you're just crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and by accepting it in some way, it's an indication it will be approved. And they don't always necessarily make the distinction. So some of those complaints are just ill-founded in terms of people basically saying, why go through all that trouble? There's 900 people with names on a petition or on a pro forma objection. So it's dead simple, just refuse it. Don't accept it. So that's some of it. And then you get folk that have a better understanding of the planning system and try and use every rule, every policy, every procedure, every part of the process to try and bring it down and knock you back, snakes and ladders. Oh, you didn't do that, or they didn't do that. The applicants send it back. And obviously that's why, going back to, how long does it take to determine applications? Part of that process is trying to make sure we get it right, without borrowing from another context, but getting it right first time in terms of the process from the point where we receive it to the point where we make the decision to minimise the flack around the edges, and we try and keep the focus on the actual planning merits. I wish some of our detractors played the same fair game, but those complaints, they fill the numbers, they're in there, they have to be dealt with, they clog up the system, but they're not well made in the context of the likes of Killock, where folk are complaining about something before it's been determined.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks, Ian. Does anybody else have any questions or comments want to make? Anybody online? No. Just on, Ian, just on paragraph 12, so 8 premature complaints, and that's counted into a percentage as complaints against the council, although they're premature complaints, so they're not actual complaints because they've not went through the correct process. So it seems a bit, I suppose, unfair that there's not another category that those 8 complaints could be filed in rather than a complaint against the council. Is it? Can you give us a wee bit of context around that?
No, thanks. It's a good point, Chair. And so those premature complaints are not included in the overall numbers of complaints that the Ombudsman receive. Okay, they're separated, but they do, and they have consistently reported on the number of premature complaints that they receive, because they see this as being almost the council needs to do more to attract, not attract, but to direct complainants through the council's procedures. But if a complainant wants to go to the Ombudsman before they come to the council, there's actually not anything we can do about it. By the time we either receive the formal complaint, they've already went to the Ombudsman. So all we can do is try and encourage and promote and get complainants to understand the procedure, that if they do go to the Ombudsman first, they will not be entertained. They will be signposted back to the council. The Ombudsman don't tell us that they have done that. They don't tell us, oh, we've received a complaint from a constituent, but the only way we would find out is if they disclose that to us when they do make a complaint. But you're absolutely right, and you'll see that the overall numbers that the Ombudsman does receive, even though it's increasing, it's still a relatively small number, and so is the number of the complaints that have been classed as premature. So in previous year, we include the trend information around that. I think last year was the lowest ever number of premature complaints we'd ever received. So we expected that we would increase again. It's only natural. And, we can't stop people going direct to the Ombudsman, unfortunately. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Ian. Thank you. So, Councillor Mabin.
Page 25, part 14. It's talking about training and training modules, and this includes all staff Granicus updates. I don't know what Granicus updates is. Can I get an explanation of that? And just training in general, are the staff now doing better with training, and they're better at what they're doing? They're up to date. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so the training on the back of those changes to the complaints handling procedure, we introduced mandatory training for frontline staff, in fact, for all staff to complete that. And that's really, it's about complaints, but it's really about customer service. It's about how you deal at a front line with people who are unhappy with the service that they received. So it really kind of takes employees back to first principles about dealing with customers. That's the intention around that training. It touches on complaints, but it's more about customer service. So it's a really good point. And sorry, you mentioned another. Oh, Granicus, sorry. Granicus is the name of a product. So see the emails and the messages that you'll receive direct from our communications team around things like, any number of topics they'll cover. It's just that's the platform that use Granicus is the name of the platform that you use to issue. So apologies, it's maybe needing a wee bit of explanation. That's all it is. It's just the platform that we use to promote some of these issues, whether it's a communications issue or a service delivery issue as well. Yeah, thanks.
Just to say as well, Chair, that part of that training is to impress on staff that, we're not in the business of looking to solicit complaints, and everything should be dealt with as close to source as possible. So if somebody's on the phone to a service, picking in anyone, but say, my bin wasn't emptied, it's a complaint because they expected their bin to be emptied. But if the solution is to arrange to have it emptied that day, and the customer's happy with that, and it's a one-off, for instance, and you might want to say, well, it's happened for 4 weeks, and then it becomes a complaint. If you can deal with issues, problems, matters arising, without necessarily putting it through as a complaint because the person's happy. It was just a break in service. Somebody missed it. The guy was looking at them, whatever. So we do encourage staff not to immediately put it into a complaints process and have it all wrapped up in the whole process if we can avoid it, unless the person absolutely insists on it. So we are trying to get that balance of, if it's a minor thing that just can be fixed, then fix it. And if the person's happy with that, then it's an operational matter. And that's part of the training as well, is to let folk know what to do with things and to be cited on. That's what goes into complaints process, but that's what you can do with just operational matters and try and deal with everything as close to source as possible.
Okay, thanks, David. Anybody have any more questions or comments? No. So with that, can we agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. Ian, thank you very much for your paper this morning. Thank you. So we'll move on to the annual procurement report. Is that being presented by Leslie?
Just, if you bear with me, Chair, I'll just introduce it, and then the procurement manager Leslie McLean is online, Chair, to present the detail.
Thanks, David.
Just to clarify, remember, in terms of context, we produce 2 major reports a year in relation to the council's procurement function. One is around about, I think it was the 30th of March this year, but we put in place, as close as we can to the beginning of each year, financial year, a procurement strategy. And the last one was approved, as I say, by Cabinet. I think it was 30th of March this year. So we have this year's annual strategy in place. And then a bit like you hear with the performance reporting, there is that timeline. So we've just put this year's strategy forward, well, back in March. And then we report once a year to Governance and Scrutiny on the outturn of performance against the previous year's strategy for the previous financial year, and we try and pull that together and bring it here around about this time after the summer recess. So this is the look back against how did we do against the previous strategy and targets and work plan for the year. And as I say, Leslie will take you through that. Just to clarify that although the UK went through Brexit, if we all remember that, if we have to, that changed the UK status as becoming not a member of the EU, but the references to the EU directives remain relevant because the EU directives directly informed what is still the current UK and Scottish legislation and regulations on procurement. When we were in the EU, domestic law had to align with EU procurement law, and although we're now out of the EU, the law hasn't been changed domestically, although it's in the gift now of the UK and Scottish legislators, although it's reserved, so it's mainly going to be the UK legislator to now review our current domestic procurement legislation and implement any changes or departures from what was previously compliant with the EU directive. But until that new legislation comes and it's still at bill stage, then we are still working under the old regime, notwithstanding the country is no longer a member of the EU. And with those couple of points, I would just hand over to Leslie now, Leslie McLean, the Council Procurement Manager, who will take members through the detail of the report, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Leslie, how are you?
Yeah, thanks, David. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. As David mentioned before, I'm here to present the Council's annual procurement report as required under the Reform Scotland Act 2014 for the period the 1st of April 2021 to the 31st of March 2022. The report aims to provide visibility to members that the Council's procurement activities are being conducted in accordance with the Act, as well as aims, objectives and priorities as detailed within the Council's corporate procurement strategy. As required under the Act, we are legally required to prepare the annual report on all of our regulated procurement activity. And the report that you have in front of you today has been produced using the Scottish Government's standardised template. The report itself summarises the performance of the Council's procurement activity for the reporting period. It also demonstrates how our procurement activity delivers value for money and contributes to the achievement of our aims and objectives, and which both reflect national and local policies and priorities, taking into considering the Council's approach to sustainability, community benefits, fair working practices, health and safety, and improvements within our communities. As a minimum, we are required to report on very specific matters, and I'm now actually going to provide an overview of what they are. So I'm going to actually take you through the report itself. So on page 52 of the report, we have provided a summary of the regulated procurement activity, which has been completed during the reporting period. Table 1 notes that we delivered 21 regulated procurements. However, the team did actually deliver 147 projects within the period, many of them actually being capital works projects under the £2 million regulated threshold. On page 53, we've also taken the opportunity to note that the team have issued 871 low-value sub £50,000 quick quotes. Many of them were issued to local contractors and suppliers within the East Ayrshire and the wider Ayrshire area to give them the opportunity to bid for public sector work. On page 54, we have set out how our procurement activity is undertaken in compliance with the legislation. We do observe a number of general duties to fulfil the regulatory and policy obligations, and a high-level summary is provided. So, for example, we do develop commodity strategies for each of our projects. We do promote payment of the living wage and inclusion of sustainability and community benefits within our contracts. On pages 58 to 62, I've also provided a summary of the community benefits. These are the benefits which have been reported by the Council's appointed contract administrators, who are responsible for the monitoring and management of their own contract portfolio on behalf of the Council. You will note that we have put down quite a few benefits delivered in terms of some of our health and social care partnership contracts which have been delivered, but we also wanted to note the information about the fantastic DFIB initiative which we launched on behalf of the Council. It was a joint initiative between our procurement team and colleagues within health and safety. It is an initiative which is gathering further support from our contracted suppliers. You will note that we've actually had DFIBs and external DFIB boxes provided by 10 suppliers, which are listed in the report. We've actually had a further 8 delivered, and they're sitting in HQ waiting to be delivered out to our communities over the next couple of weeks. Page 63 of the report provides a summary of the steps taken to facilitate the involvement of supported businesses within our procurement activity. Whilst we haven't actually awarded any contracts last year, we have spent approximately £185,000 with supported businesses through various other local and national frameworks. So that is a good news story that we're actually keeping some of our disadvantaged people in employment. And on page 64, we've provided a link to our future regulated procurement activity, and that is a link which is also available on the Council's website. On pages 65 to 68 of the report, we have also included information in relation to our spend profile by client service. We also provided information in regards to our contracted, non-contracted spend, which we do monitor. We've put in a cash saving overview, and I thought it was quite important to put in a breakdown of our spend with local SMEs, because going forward it is going to be part of our community wealth building agenda to support local suppliers to bid for more opportunities and keep that wealth local. So whilst that is not a statutory reporting requirement, we have included the data to give members visibility that we have implemented and are applying sound governance arrangements in accordance with legal requirements and our own council policies. And finally, the attached appendices provide information in relation to the regulated contracts awarded and our pipeline of projects which we are currently progressing in the team. And that concludes my report, Chair, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leslie. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this paper? Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, on page 55, I'm just looking at the community benefit, and we're saying that we're looking at local contractors and subcontractors. How do they get to know about that? Is it something that we put out as a council, or have they got to look at the procurement, the Scottish procurement system?
No, we actually include community benefits as part of our tender portfolio, so that's actually built into the documentation. So when suppliers actually bid for work, they've actually got to commit to delivering community benefits. So many of the bigger construction projects, we do actually have quite robust procedures in regards to community benefits. A lot of the capital works projects, it's all about the employability, skills, training, whereas some of the other benefits we get on some of the social care contracts are what we sort of classify as softer benefits. So that could be, for instance, volunteering, sponsorship, delivery of food parcels, cinema tickets to some of our disadvantaged children that are going through hardship. So they are built into our contract portfolio and they are monitored and measured by our contract administrators following contract award. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, that's great, and that'll just extend year on year. It's something that will happen year on year.
Yes, it is something that we ask. We do actually send out an email annually to all the contract administrators asking them to report their community benefits delivered as part of their contract portfolio back to the centre. And following today, I've actually agreed with David that we'll do a follow-up, because obviously by the time I've reported the annual report for lodging, we actually got some further reports in from some of the contract administrators which haven't been included in the report. So we'll probably do a sweep up just after that to actually codify that. But it is going to be it is very much an annual report.
Thanks very much, and well done on all the defibrillators. It's great to see them in the communities. So thanks for your hard work on that.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks, Leslie. See, just in terms of obviously our community wealth building and procurement is I suppose we can use that for change within our communities through procurement, and in terms of supporting local spend to support our local communities. So could you just maybe expand a wee bit on the SMEs and how we can support them to be able to apply for some of or bid for some of the contracts within the council?
Yep. Members may be aware that the corporate procurement team work very closely with colleagues within economic development who have supplier development officers appointed. We also work very closely with the supplier development programme, offering training, support, guidance and assistance. Our team do still offer breakfast briefings with suppliers. If we have contract opportunities, we'll have contractor and supplier days, usually held within the chamber, just to take them through the procurement process, to let them know what's involved. We'll get them registered on the different procurement systems that are in use. We'll talk them through the terminology. We actually give a lot of suppliers debrief information to help support any tender opportunities which they're looking to apply for in the future. We've had quite a few suppliers who have been unsuccessful for North and South Ayrshire Councils tender opportunities, and our team have actually sat and went through their tender documents just to give them a sort of good practice, general guidelines, sort of good practice support for where they've maybe went wrong, where they could maybe improve on for enhancing any future bids. And that's something that we do on a regular basis, but we do that in conjunction and in support of the economic development colleagues that are appointed to monitor and measure the sort of supplier development activity for the council.
That's great, Leslie. It just seems that there's a lot of support going out there. So do you find that there's more and more SMEs signing up to this support and are actually being successful in their bids?
We've had quite a lot of new contractors applying for public sector work, especially in East Ayrshire Council. Some of our bigger facility and property management, some of our construction contracts, we're actually seeing quite a lot of our local contractors applying for them. For example, DM Home Shield, they are a local supplier. They've actually just been awarded a place on one of our big reactive and repairs and maintenance frameworks. So some really good news stories. A lot of consultancy support being delivered by a lot of our local providers as well. So we are starting to see an increase. You'll note that in my report, I've actually put spend on local SMEs at 23.6%. I think we have to caveat that figure because a lot of our spend profile, just because the suppliers may be working in East Ayrshire, they're employing East Ayrshire residents, their invoice address might be in Glasgow or it might be in South Ayrshire. So the figures are a bit skewed, but we do know that we are spending locally in the likes of like Juicens, who are employing local people. So yeah, there is an increase, and we're hoping to continue that increase. And as I said before, we do work very closely with colleagues in economic development, and we'll continue to do that and offer that support.
That's great, Leslie. Thanks very much. And yeah, an absolutely fantastic initiative, as Elaine's already mentioned, the defibrillator initiative, and the contractors that are donating them, certainly helping us gain our defibrillator authority recognition by, supplying these free to our communities. So it's a really, really good initiative, and well done to health and safety, procurement, and of course a big thanks to the companies that are donating the defibrillators. So thanks very much. Okay, members, thank you. So can we agree direct? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cannon.
So just very quickly, obviously Leslie mentioned the supplier development programme. If some members are not aware of it, it's a company which is funded by largely by the Scottish Government, and they want to work with local companies, not just for bidding for work for East Ayrshire Council, but other councils, obviously across Scotland. And they work very closely. They advise companies when there are big contracts coming up. They're really trying to link small companies into public sector work. So, I mean, they've got a Facebook page, they've got Twitter. I'd advise you to any companies in your ward to make them aware of this company, because they're really doing some good work and trying to get SMEs linked in.
You want to come in there, David? Sorry.
It was just to add to that in terms of, I think it was 2003 Procurement Community Governance, and then the procurement reform that was occasioned by the McClelland Review came within a year or two, because we were lucky that way. The point being that around about 2005, all of this was paper-based. Every tender, every council, every government body put out was all largely paper-based. So it's been a hell of a shift in 15 years for businesses from that size to the smallest local business to actually make the shift from putting your figures in a form contract in a bid in paper and receiving them. We still get reverend standing orders to members signing at the front in the reception to receive bids coming in by 12 o'clock on a Monday. So the whole country's come a hell of a long way in the last 15 years by moving from a totally paper-based system to now e-tendering, which is the system the government runs. So after the reform was implemented, the headlines are it was clearly recognised that businesses, particularly the smaller ones that maybe don't have the resources to invest in the training and development side of things, needed help. For them to make the shift, it was enough. It was a seismic change for us to actually implement the e-tendering along with the e-purchasing, the PCOS system, when it was all, as I say, paper-based. So it was a big shift for us, and it was recognised at every level it would be a major challenge for the smaller businesses. So as Councillor Cannon's referred to, that's the origins of the supplier development programme, which is overseen by Scottish Government, and most councils adopt the same approach as us, which is procurement working in tandem with your economic development service to actually identify the businesses that would benefit from being directed. We run breakfast seminars in the past to bring them in along with SDP to try and help people make that switch from paper-based, because that's no more, it's not an option, to the e-tendering. And within that, yeah, the next argument is, how do small businesses win multi-million pound contracts? So the answer is they usually won't, but as colleagues have said, if small companies can get visibility on the portal of the big ones that are getting out, and where there will be and where the authorities specify what they're looking for under community benefit, and also on the principle of using local companies where possible, then they can see what opportunities might come, and it allows them to put themselves forward to the bigger companies that are winning the contracts to help them fulfil a requirement for a degree of local use by making themselves known and available to the private companies. Because once they've won public sector contracts through all this three-ring circus of the due process and governance of a formal tender, as private companies they have a bit more freedom as to how they then engage their subcontractors. But what you have is us trying to direct them to the local companies, and us working with the local companies so that they're sighted in what opportunities are coming, in the expectation expectation that that will bring parties together where there's appropriate arrangements to be made and companies getting involved. So that's a very broad brush approach of the kind of last 15 years of where procurement has come from and where it has gone on a national basis, and what we try and do to bring smaller business, support smaller businesses to, without getting into cliche mode, you know, take the journey or make the change along with the rest of us.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, folks. Councillor Mabin.
Hi, just page 52, table 1, noted there's 42,250,000 has been spent. Is that an increase or a decrease on previous years? I'm new to this, so I'm curious to how the procurement team work. Is there a limit or a budget they work to? Do they get to 42 million and that's them, they've tapped out for the year and they have to stop doing procurement, for example?
Procurement, as I say, sit within governance through you, Chair, and they are a support service. So in terms, basically, the council has standing orders directly in relation to contracts, and they are the sovereign document that govern how client services and procurement require to do business. So the bottom line is the main requirements are, before I can sign off on any contract on behalf of the council, one, it needs to have been through a recognised formal tender process. And as you'll pick up from this, there can be many options. You can go for a full tender yourself, you can go and use an existing framework that's out there, you can have call off, you can have direct award, you can have all sorts of different options. So in big terms, don't want to turn us into a whole procurement thing, but in big terms, the key part, they used to have a brilliant diagram, I'm going to try and dig it out, but it was from the McClellan review, and it was like the London Underground map, and what it tried to impress is, you're never done with procurement. It's an evolutionary process, and in broad terms, the challenge is let's start somewhere, get the spec right, and I'll come back to that at the end, but get the spec right in terms of what does the client need, what does the council need from this contract, what do we want to achieve, who are we trying to help, what are we trying to build or supply services to whom and what services. Get the spec right, and as I say, I'll come back to commodity strategy at the end of the journey. So if you get the spec right and you get the process right and you apply the process and you've got your evaluation criteria right in terms of the financial split, the quality split, in the very early days it was always about the money, it maybe be 90% finance and 10% quality, but as you'll see now from a range of these, you know, it has evolved over time, and there's a recognition it's not just about the money, it's about the quality in some issues. So you might have 50-50 or 60-40, so that's part of your commodity strategy. But if you get the spec right and we know what we need to procure, then the next thing is to get the tender right and get the contract right and make sure you've got a contracted supplier who equally understands what you need and is in a position to fulfil it. A lot of people think then at that point, when I award the contract or the council awards the contract, what requires to be in place is sign off from the head of service and the client side that the budget's there. Because we're not spending our budgets, we're putting contracts in place to allow the client services to spend their budgets. The works ones will probably fall either from the capital programme managed by Andrew in behalf of the client services, or the ARA capital programme for the roads, the joint roads work, which is approved separately by Cabinet as part of the budget, and Council, sorry, as part of the budget each year. So that's just a reporting of a figure at a point in time, because that's the format that Scottish Government has, and the clarity is you have above a certain value, which is into the millions, it's a full-blown OJU tender, that's bells, whistles, 3 rings. Then you have regulated, which are less in value, but are above the kind of minimum threshold of 50k, and they're the regulated ones and they're governed by Scottish legislation. And then you have smaller ones for lower value, but they still need to go through a tender process. So all that is a figure in time that last year, within the category of regulated procurement contracts, on behalf of a whole range of services, that's the value. It might not be the final spend, you see the final measurements paper later, there can be variations, but all that simply is a statement that this council put through 21 contracts with a total value of 42 million, but the budget doesn't sit with procurement, the budget sits, and one of the bits of paper I need before I can sign the contract in compliance with the council standing orders is a sign off from a head of service that tells me the budget is there for this, And as you'll know, you'll already, I think I've seen from Cabinet, if we don't have the budget, so if, say, Cabinet said £1 million for a project and we go out and tender, and it's happening more and more these days with the fluctuation in the market. So if the tender comes back at 1.5, that's when you'll see a paper back to Cabinet saying, what do you want us to do here? We've got £1 million, we can't sign up to a 1.5 million contract. Do you want us to abandon the project, modify the project? Do you want to give us more money so we can go ahead with the original spec, but with the extra £500,000 in that scenario? So it's always an evolutionary process, but it's working with the client. It's not what procurement do on our own. We have to work with clients. We've actually got a really good model whereby ARA actually fund an additional officer because we identified their need, and through the capital programme we have somebody working full-time purely on the ARA works contracts, and we also previously, they all work within procurement. They report to Leslie and myself, but we refer to the term almost outposted. I've got another officer who's full-time within facilities and property management, working cheek by jowl with the colleagues there who are responsible for the delivery of the capital programme. So we get in amongst them, we work with them, we help them identify their needs and put that into the spec. We advise on the best route to market for whatever the need is, work, supplies, goods, services, and then we put the tender in place. Going back to that procurement journey, it doesn't end when we award the contract. It just means the next stage starts, because a good contract is one that works well for both parties. And that might seem trite, but you can see how many times, occasionally it'll go wrong. And the way to ensure it's working for both parties is to have ongoing meaningful engagement throughout the life of the contract, which is where the role of the contract administrator comes in, because we have 10 staff in procurement, and over a 4-year period average, there are 450 contracts that are in play, needing to be renewed, replaced, or improved upon. So their function is to put the arrangements in place and then hand back to the client service. And the model is that the client service has a trained, competent contract administrator to do that engagement, proportionate to the contract. You don't need to phone them up every day to have a blether if they're delivering apples to a school once a week. But equally, if they're making deliveries to 20 council locations in a day, like the old Lyrical for the stationery, then there's always that scope of, is there a cheaper way of doing it? And that comes through engagement. Okay, that's what we agreed, but actually if you changed it, you could take a journey off a week. We still get what we want when we need it, but you've saved time, fuel and cost. And it's that improving it so that they're not doing things we didn't actually need, and we're not paying for things they don't actually need to do. So that comes just through effective management of the contract. And we have also, through procurement, set up a whole portal for our colleagues and client services to support the contract administration function, recognising how important it is, because what you need at the end of the life of a contract is that record of that engagement to understand and answer the question when you as councillors ask us, did that contract work well or not, rather than just saying, I've worked for me. Then we can actually look and say, here's where we made improvements, here's where we identified issues. And back to the circular journey on the London Underground, back to getting the spec right, you take that learning from the first period the contract's in place, and you make sure you apply it to your spec. And you make sure if there was room for improvement on your first attempt, that you make the improvements in the second attempt before you go back out. And that's why procurement is always alive in an evolutionary process. So sorry that went on a wee bit longer, but it was just to clarify, because I keep saying it, but I'm conscious we've got new members, and I think it's appropriate just to give a bit of context sometimes where it's relevant. But if it's not relevant, please by all means tell me. So the big issue and the big answer to your question is procurement help client services spend their budgets. They manage the budgets. They manage any overrun or cost overrun against estimates, and they have to sign off the monies there. That's the one thing I'm not signing off is the client services budget, but I'm signing off that the process is right. I'm signing off that it's evaluated right. I get the evaluation reports, and that's the governance we have. And I suppose the obvious question is just for clarity, is that's the way it's always been under the standing orders. And the reason for that is I know other councils sometimes bring decisions on contract awards to a committee or cabinet or council, but my view is that if we've been through a legal tender process, particularly at the European level, where you then get to the standstill period, at the point we issue the standstill letter, you're actually committing to signing it unless to awarding the contract unless a legal challenge comes in. if I come with you or to Cabinet with a paper that says we've been out to tender, we've done all of that, and here is, it's not a recommendation, it's actually an outcome that you've no discretion over. If it's not a no due one and you're not minded to proceed, the only decision you can take is we'll just not proceed with the project if you don't like the outcome. But what you can't do, so that's why we don't put it in front of members, what you can't do is obviously say, well, we don't actually like the preferred bidder, so we'll give it to number 2. So our arrangements reflect the reality of the situation, which is the main elements are that a proper compliant process is followed, because if you follow the process you will get better value. And I know there's all sorts of scuttlebutt about this and that and pens cheaper down the road, but the whole point is if you are buying something there and there, a single commodity, take the pens, the whole concept is that you aggregate up all of your need for that commodity, you bulk up, and you should get a better return for your buck when you're buying in greater volumes rather than 10 different paces in the council buying pens there and whatever. So part of it is knowing your business, part of it is getting it right in the spec, part of it is getting award right, but part of it is, a big part as well, is managing those relations to get the best out of the contract and to get the best into the next tender for the next episode or chapter in that particular area of service provision. But the money sits with the clients, and we make sure that they are satisfied they've got the money before we commit the council to the contract.
Thank you, really helpful. I don't know about the other new councillors, that's about an education I'm learning all the time. To follow on to something different, so some of the money last year was COVID money that came up from Westminster during the crisis, and I can see it's been given out to various charities helping out families who are struggling, like Lisa Lana. That's a second question. Can someone tell me a wee bit about Lisa Lana later, please? I'm thinking the COVID money is now spent, and we are entering an energy crisis, a cost of living crisis, and we're not going to be able to do the same in the next year to help the same charities in the same way. Would you comment on that, please?
Bring Leslie in a minute, because I may be about to make a faux pas here, but what I would say is at page 59 onwards, what we are actually reporting are community benefits delivered by existing contracted suppliers. So, for instance, there on page 59, reactive property framework, the supplier's TCS responds. What you then have below that are the benefits that company has produced. So when you go over the page, and this came up in a query from one of the other members prior to the meeting, is when you go over to the other page there below Optima Health on page 60, Bernardo's are a contracted supplier with the council. We pay them and they supply services to the Health and Social Care Partnership across children and family services. So what's listed there isn't what we gave them to put out. What's listed there is, as I and Leslie will confirm, is what they were able as a contracted supplier to offer as additional community benefit. As did Women's Aid, as did Lisa Lana. So these are the benefits they supplied. For instance, Lisa Lana, they work with families, certain families, children with assessed needs, they're a contracted suppliers. So these are the benefits they were able to supply within the confines of the contracts they have with us to provide other services. So it's not so much we gave them that to help their activities, it's what they did for us in our communities as community benefits on top of the contracts they have. Beyond that, in terms of the contrast between COVID government responses, and I would only repeat because we're getting into the money, so I know my limitations, but I think the point was made in another discussion this week by Eddie, that for COVID we were given £73 million of additional money to spend in East Ayrshire. And at the moment, for the cost of living, the financial position is we could probably identify about £3 million. So quite clearly, the ability to respond to the cost of living compared to the ability to respond to COVID is 70 million lighter at the moment because of the position we're all in that I'm not getting into and everyone else is well familiar with. But it's a wholly different challenge. It's a wholly different situation because obviously, and I'm not buying or selling for anybody politically, but obviously what's gone before logically has informed the capacity to respond to the next crisis following the pandemic. So that's where I would leave that one. That's the comparative figures. Government's made 73 million of additional funding available to East Ayrshire, and at the moment for the cost of living, we think we're looking at around 3 million. I don't know where that's coming or of our own resources at the moment, but I'm answering the question in the sense of the contrast between what was made available for the pandemic and what is, because of that perhaps, now available for what we face next. And I would leave it at that, as I said, because I do know my limitations. That's one, as you know, the council are dealing with. Arrangements are in place, it's being considered, and it will be brought forward, I think, to the next council. Well, not the one in September, it's a community planning one, but arrangements have been made, actually, I think, to have a special council, because the one at the end of October is too late to bring proposals for the response to cost of living. So it's in hand, and there's a paper to come to council around that from, I think, the Deputy Chief Exec's leading in that with others. So it has been looked at, but it's not a good news story. And although it's well beyond the procurement thing, it isn't a good news story, but that's the position.
Okay, that clarifies matters. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just to supplement that, in addition to that formal meeting of council, there's a spotlight session that members will have in their diary now as well for the 22nd of September, and that will be with community planning partners and the full council, and that's an attempt to share with members some of the work that is currently happening on the ground, but also that will inform that report that David mentioned as well. Thanks.
That's helpful, Ian, thank you. David?
I didn't mention that because I didn't want to miss Sel. I knew there's also a member seminar arranged for the locality and place planning that's under review just now, but so as Ian said, yeah, just to endorse that we'll be coming to engage with members on the cost of living before the formal report comes.
Thanks, David. Okay, members, can we agree the recommendations? Yep, okay, thank you. Leslie, thank you very much for presenting the paper.
Thank you.
Okay, David, I think it's over to yourself, a word of contracts.
And just assure you, members, Chairman, my passion for procurement it is controllable, so it won't spill into these. These are more routine. These are just part of the suite of governance documents we've developed over time with input from previous membership of the committee. These are the kind of reports that we bring because members have told us there is an appetite and that makes good sense in terms of being open and transparent in how we conduct our business. So the purpose of this is simply to have a public record and allow scrutiny by members of who we're doing business with. And this was one of the first in the suite. Question was asked around the period. It was basically quarterly, because the question is, when do we have, roughly enough worth reporting? It's quarterly, but obviously the way the meeting falls, sometimes it cuts into that full 4-month period, and Stuart is very, very precise with the dates, which is why you've got that 3rd of June to the 18th of August, because the last one we're going to the 2nd of June, and the next one will start on the 19th. So that's just the cut-off that reflects the process for this meeting, but it's broadly quarterly, and its purpose is simply to say, I've described everything about the tender process, but the quid pro quo to the fact that the council's governance arrangements in terms of the standing orders, as these are signed off by me, the purpose of this report is to then give it visibility to councillors and the public in terms of those outcomes of those tenders. Obviously we write to other bidders and deal with all of that, but this is for general public consumption so that people can see not just who we awarded to, but who else was able to bid and did bid, and therefore what the competition was, and to try and give bits and pieces of information. As we, in terms of relevant detail, as with a lot of these, the format's been added to and then added to again over time. Each kind of additional suggestion seems to make sense, but then you end up with War and Peace and no spacing on the boxes. So we do keep it under review. We're always happy to take guidance, because at the end of the day, the purpose of these reports is to meet the needs of members to fulfil the scrutiny function, not the need of officers to make reports. So we will always listen and take advice from the committee as to how you'd want to see them presented. But this is the product basically of previous years of practice, and what we simply try and give you by service, by department, I'm not allowed to say department, it's not allowed, but I don't think it's relevant anymore, by service is the contract, who won it, and the contract amount, and who else bid, and the other bids. So at a glance, you can see for the first one, it went to the cheapest bidder. But as I spoke about earlier, it's not just about the cheapest in terms of that financial quality split and the valuation. It's actually about meat. The most economically advantageous tender is what you're looking for. So you will see equally in some of these individual reports that in fact it might not have gone to the cheapest, but there'll then be an explanation that says they weren't the lowest value, but when you add in the quality assessment over the piece, they were the successful bidder. And again, that's all set out in the contract, so every company knows how we'll allocate the scores, what we're looking for in the quality statements. And it's not just ticking boxes, it's the quality statements should reflect what we need, what are the key elements of the service that we need to see done well, and how's it going to be delivered. So what the paper tells you, as I say, is who got it, at what value, who else was in, at what values they bid, and where appropriate, other explanation as to why it wasn't the lowest price, where the quality criteria, for instance, top of page 87, it was 30 price and 70 quality for the one against the footnote, which was the short haul data circuits. So obviously IT colleagues, as an example, put a greater premium on the quality of the product than simply the value. So that's by way of explanation. So as you know, there are works contracts, which are contracts for construction at different values. There are supply contracts, which then break down into goods and services, and we try and reflect that here. But there are different ways to approach those when you're evaluating tenders and awarding tenders and reporting them. So we try and cover it. That's why they don't all look the same. That's a long way of saying that's why they don't all look the same. So I won't pick any out, but what I always say with this, and particularly to the newer members, what you will get from this is an appreciation of the absolute width and depth of all of the activity that goes on under the council, under all the other colleague heads of service, the wide range of activity. You know, we all go down the rabbit hole and we get involved in roads matters, we get involved in the schools, we get involved in this and that, and you gain that appreciation of the complexity of that. But what we don't always all have is that oversight of each rabbit hole, you know, can take you to that level of challenge and complex issues. So it is quite amazing to me, actually, that the size of the council, every unitary authority and the range of responsibilities it had. And this report just reflects, as a snapshot in time, some of the contractual needs of this council. And as we identified, that's a 4-month period. Maybe June, July. So a 3-month period, quarterly. I can't do arithmetic. And within that 3 months, that's the business that we've transacted. And that's not exceptional. That's pretty much average. That's the level of contractual activity that the team of 10 in procurement under Leslie's excellent management, I can say that now she's away, that they deliver. And people aren't always cited. I go back to the 450 contracts over averaging a rolling 4-year period, and you can see the detail of that. And it is a snapshot of just how much the council, each council, not about East Ayrshire alone, how much each council undertakes in so many different areas. And we have to get it all right, and that's what we try to do. So that's the background of that report, chairing members. I won't go into that every meeting, but given this is kind of it's maybe not the first time you've seen it, actually, thinking back, but I just thought we'd take the time just to give it a bit of context. If any members have any questions on any specifics, we'll be happy to try and address them.
Thanks, David. So anybody, any comments, questions for David? Yep.
Sorry, just an observation. I've noticed that the estimated values of some of these contracts and what's finally awarded is, in a lot of occasions, lower. Is that just a timing issue in terms of prices creeping up over time and by the time the bids are won, or are we underestimating the value of these contracts?
Sometimes it can happen. I think it's more likely to happen at the moment with the fluctuating market and everything we're seeing post-Brexit, post-COVID, post whatever else we're in just now, whatever else is causing, obviously there's the cost of living and fuel and everything, but we're seeing material prices go up as well. So to be fair to colleagues in services, sometimes in the bigger contracts we have to work it up. It goes back to the budget. We need to have an idea of what we think it's going to cost before we can put the budget in place. And as I say, sometimes when you actually get to market, whether there's a gap in time or not, but for whatever reason, yes, sometimes you go out, we've maybe thought it could be done that way and focusing, no, it needs to be done that way from the market. But if I go back to my journey, Part of developing the commodity strategy before you even get to the spec involves engaging with the market. So if you've had a contract in place and you've done all that engagement with that supplier, but when you're coming to the end of your contract, about 6 to 9 months before it's due to end, you start thinking for the next one. And we now, for all the major contracts, work with client services to produce a commodity strategy, which is to reflect the thinking of where we think we need to go in the market, etc., etc. But we actually will consult with the market. So if you get into an area like IT or even construction, where you maybe not construction, we're in there all the time, but if you get into an area where you maybe haven't been for a few years, then it makes sense to avail yourself of the information and knowledge about what the market's reflecting. So you can actually go out with questionnaires and surveys. We're thinking of putting a tender out and seek views from companies about who are in the market about what the themes are, what the current issues are, and what you need to allow for. So we try and get it right as best we can and fair to colleagues, but it's not an exact science. And yes, there will be times when two things. One, there'll be time when the estimate is out, by the time we've even about to award the contract, the value is actually coming in at the time. And then the other one will obviously be, there's three figures. There's what did we think it would cost, what did we award the contract for, and then was the outturn, and that's the next paper, was the outturn above or below the contract award. And the fee might not always align, but the estimate needs to be aligned into the budget approval by the time we award. But equally then it's about managing that contract, as I said before, to try and bring it in on the contracted price. But as members will know, there are various provisions in contracts so that if things are delayed either by the contractor or the customer, then there may well be additional cost for that in terms of managing the impact in the programme. So they don't always turn out on the contracted price, which is the purpose of the next paper, to let you see what those outturns are. But the bottom line is it's not an exact science, and yes, sometimes the estimated value, what we think it's going to cost, doesn't necessarily reflect. But there will be times, not as many, but there are sometimes times where you win a watch and the estimated value was actually higher and the market has delivered. But I think the opportunity for the market to deliver pleasant surprises is diminishing quick because of all the other factors we're aware of in terms of fuel costs and indeed material costs and everything else that's going on, whatever the cause of that. So short answer is they do try. I don't want to be glib. To be fair to them, when you take something like a £60 million project for Barony or 50 million, whatever's allocated for Doon, and if that's not the right figure, don't get me shot. But you know, you're not going to get that bang on the money at that kind of with all those different elements. So it's an evolving process. But the point is that we need to always keep it under review. And in terms of that governance oversight, then our budgets need to be approved before contracts are let.
Okay, that's clear, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Canning.
Just a couple of quick things. A glossary of terms might be useful, just so that we fully understand what we're, there's things like CATS, price card and stuff, and just to be glossary of terms would be helpful. The second thing, I don't know about other members, but I think it'd be quite useful to know which ward, where there are local companies involved. And I'm mindful of David's comment about adding lots of stuff, but where it is applicable, in brackets, just a number of wards against where the headquarters are. I know it's not an exact science in terms of where companies are located, but if even just the headquarters, where it's applicable, I don't know whether that's possible, but suggest.
I'll have a look with Stuart. I'm conscious we did used to, I wouldn't use head offices because you want to know who you're dealing with, and that would perhaps distort either way. If a company's got a head office in Edinburgh but a local office in Kilmarnock, and you're dealing with the Kilmarnock branch, then that you would want to class that fairly as local. So it's not so much about the headquarters. We did used to have their addresses in, and I see it's kind of, for instance, at the top of page 87, we're getting told British Telecom are in London, but it seems to have dropped out the rest. What I would propose is we can at least give an indication of where the company's based in terms of where did we send the contract to, where are they operating from, and let members see that. I don't know that there's that many that are actually within the boundaries as opposed to Ayrshire that would make it worthwhile putting it down to ward, but if we have the town or village that they're based in, then members can see that for themselves. So that might be the compromise, but I'll work with Stuart in that. I think, as I said, some of that was there. Falconry Services there, he's actually up in Falkirk, I know that, but that's just acquired knowledge over time. So I think we will go back to putting in the basic address where the business that we've contracted with is operating from, because I think that's a truer reflection than head office. And if you have that, members will be able to, you'll know the businesses without us telling you they're in your ward probably anyway, but that's maybe the reasonable compromise rather than ward level, because it's not in our gift. And as soon as you start allocating or reporting things in ward level, you start to see, and it'll purely be chance whether they're in that ward or that ward. And, you know, there isn't a way to compensate and find ways to make sure, you know, there's companies in every ward that are engaged. It depends where they're based. So I would go with the halfway house of, we'll reintroduce their basic address, their basic location that we've contracted with, because I think that's the truest reflection in terms of that report earlier that Leslie presented, in terms of local, would be that. So we'll go back to putting their base address in that where we've awarded the contract to, where we expect it to be delivered from, and that gives that, I think, the best information around about, you know, are they local or not, and if we can see from that whether it's worth you know, putting wards in there, but there are a number that will be out with Ayrshire, and a number that are within Ayrshire but not necessarily within East Ayrshire. So we'll maybe go with addresses, and then members can see for themselves where the businesses are coming from that we are doing business with.
Yeah, everything you said makes perfect sense. That's great, thanks.
Okay. David, see, just in terms of underneath each contract, so we've got one in it states what the community benefits are. We've got others that have said to be confirmed through negotiation during the contract, and there's others as non-applicable. Is that the ones that Leslie was referring to as a sweep up?
There's a few things there, Chair. First of all, because we now report annually all the community benefits in the paper you saw earlier, I think now we are simply looking to report the community benefits from the works contracts in this paper. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you can't always apply them to all contracts, so there will genuinely be some where it wasn't appropriate to seek community benefits, and there are some where, as we say, unfortunately, folk didn't quite get to us in time to include it in this report. So there's some where it should have been, but they didn't quite get the information in time, which doesn't happen often, but unfortunately can happen for the pressures everybody's under at the moment, but we'll sweep it up in the annual paper. So it is mixed, but we're trying to get to a consistent approach, but also avoid duplicate reporting.
That's fine. You see, just in terms of community benefits not being appropriate, so in what kind of circumstances would that be for the contracts?
Particularly if it was a lower value one, you know, or if it's kind of in and out, you know, a lot of these will be delivered over the life of the contract. If you take the one at the top of page 88, they are alterations to the 21-23 Ladeside Gardens, you know, okay, it is 200 grand spend, nobody's making light of that, but they'd be in and out of the contract with duration 14 weeks. Bottom line is I think it's for the regulated ones above the 200,000. So some it's about the value. It's about not trying to squeeze small lemons, if you like, because the juice isn't in there. And others, it's about accepting where you know you're likely to get it, where it's reasonable to ask for it. And if they're in presence, you know, for a year in a construction programme, there's that opportunity to have the apprentices, to have the engagement with the schools, whatever. And you see that DM Home Shield. But if they're just in and out on a job, then where did they engage with the community there? And there is also a value threshold, because I think they apply it to the regulated contracts, so that would be the 200k value.
Thanks for understand that better now. Okay, any questions or comments? So can we agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you. Then it's the final measurements and capital works contracts for the period 1st of October 21 to 31st of March 22. Myself, David.
I thought you were going to say final report. I thought there was a cheer going up there per chair, but we're nearly there. As I said, this is the other partner to the previous paper. This is the other end of that journey. This is the final measurements, and it's for the same reason, openness and transparency. And a long time ago, before Alec McPhee kind of took the capital programme by the scruff of the neck, they're you know, were recurring issues of delays, etc., So this was to help cut through that and let everyone have visibility on where where, not so much the timeline for contracts, but if a contract takes longer than it was meant to, it can cost you money, but also any other cost overruns. So the point was made, we used to come with other paper, and the point was made, well, you tell us about what's been awarded, but you're not telling us about the outcomes. And that's when, as I say, this was born of discussion at the committee, and it was the membership that asked us to in the early days to start to produce this information. So what you have here, and it's a 6 monthly period, because it is only the capital works contracts, so we do it twice a year, although it comes round awfully quick, and my eyesight must be going, because apologies, I can't even read this. But the bottom line is that, again, we set it down by service, where we have had those outturns, and as some members may be aware, they can be long after. You might see buildings here that have been up and running for quite some time, but obviously, depending on the size of the contract and how it's constructed, there might be defects periods for a year. So sometimes the final outturn isn't agreed till maybe a year after the construction was completed. So these aren't hot off the press by any means. These are the final outturns when we've had a look and whether or not the retention sum's getting paid back. So this is your absolute final outturn on the financial side, rather than prompted by the completion of the works. So again, what you have is a range of works contracts, and what you can see, actually, to be fair, members, it is swings and roundabouts, but there are as many swings as there are roundabouts, and for the reasons given in the paper, some of them come in below, back to that. The estimated value becomes irrelevant now. The comparison in this paper is between what did we sign up in the contract and what are we actually being asked to pay. And sometimes it's not even a negative cause. Sometimes it's a positive cause, where we've maybe, when the contractors come in, we've actually maybe added, it's not the best practice, but we've maybe added to the works, something, and therefore it's not actually an overrun. It was an additional item at an additional cost that's been added in, because in reflection it made sense. So what you see there is the ups and the downs, the swings and the roundabouts, and there's a level of detail to try and explain where appropriate why there was that variance. More than 10% at the point of award. If it's more than 10%, it needs to go to Cabinet, as I say, to adjust the budget, so we control the cost or potential for cost creep before we sign off, and then again we report here, and colleagues manage all of these and obviously try and get to the best financial outcome for the council. So if there's any particular questions in any of these, I'd be happy to take them, but otherwise, as I say, it's really just in the spirit of openness and transparency to let the members of this committee and the broader public see how the money's been spent, and what the outcomes were on what are sometimes quite sizable and expensive, or at least high value contracts.
Thanks, David. I mean, it is good to see the contracts, the conclusion of the contracts. It's good to be able to see that, and as you say, you can see where the underspends and overspends have been, but the reasons being are detailed. Does anyone have any questions or comments? No. So can we agree the recommendations? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, David. So thank you for your attendance today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.